Hello, folks. Bill and Brian here for the weekly update. We are live. So, okay, well, at my age, Brian, being alive, that's saying something. I really like that.
Yeah,
That,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
And
you
I
know, it,
realized I didn't send out invites for this, so I don't know. It seems like we got two people. Welcome, join. Let us know
well, wait a
what you're
minute.
thinking.
We don't get to see the other people. We don't get to see the which do we don't get to see? LinkedIn? Is it LinkedIn we don't get to see?
I don't know, but that's the one that I usually send out a lot of invites to. So, I don't know.
Main call. All is well.
All
No,
is
we don't get to,
well.
if you're on LinkedIn, we don't know if you're watching or not. We don't get to look. If you're on Twitter, we know. If you're on YouTube, we know. If you're on
However, if you're
LinkedIn,
on
you're
LinkedIn,
secret.
if you comment, we see it. We
That's
see it. We
true.
put it up there. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um,
So,
so
Brian, day before Thanksgiving, man, what are you thankful for? Before we get started into this, what are you thankful for? Yeah, I
I'm
mean, you are the gratitude guy. I mean, that's
well, let's see. I am thankful for family, friends, the friendships and connections that we have built. I've sent a couple coffee cups to some of our members, and I got a picture this morning from somebody in the UK with his kid drinking out of a Energy Road cup. And
Brigham
and and
Young.
yep, and Marique, if you're listening, out of Poland, and anytime that we see that, it just makes our day. And
It
so,
does.
I'm thankful to be working with you, and I'm really there's so much to be thankful for. It is easy to get in a headspace of being negative and wishing for something different, but if you take a moment and really step back to what you have, not what you don't have, you
Right.
will be grateful. And
Right.
there's
It-
actually a great podcast with Henry Winkler, who is probably one of the most well liked celebrities in Hollywood because he's just. And they asked him. They said, "Why are you so positive? Why are you built this way?" And he said, "Humility and gratitude." And that's
right.
and those are the key things. Humility and gratitude. And if you approach every day not taking yourself too seriously, having humility about yourself, and being grateful for what you have. It's easy to get caught in a cycle, especially this time of year, because somebody's going to put an ad in front of you that says your life can't exist unless you buy our stuff. Um, you know, and
Right.
um, and speaking of our stuff. Sorry, I had to do that. How about you, Bill? What are you grateful for?
Well, listen, I tell you what, I'm grateful for family and friends, and Brian, I really enjoy working with you. I mean, we've worked together at four other companies, and this is the first time we got to actually work together
Yep.
to create something. And so that's been exciting. That's been fun. I'm grateful to be in the U.S. We've both been out of the country several times, and we know what it's like in other countries. And sometimes we just forget that our worst is higher than a lot of people's best.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, thankful for that. And you know what? I'm sitting here in a warm room. There are guys out there working the rigs, working the production, and they're they're doing their best so that we can have our best. And that's what I'm thankful. I'm thankful for you guys out there who are working it. And if you if you get a chance and you know somebody who's working in the field, be sure and tell them, listen, Energy Rogue appreciates them, and we don't get anywhere without them. And so I'm thankful for that. And this is getting to be just a little maybe too touchy feely.
Happy Thanksgiving, Neil. Okay. Give my love to the family, will you? Same to
Holy shnikes, it worked.
There we go. Tommy Boy to the rescue.
There,
Called reading. Top to bottom, left to right.
All right.
so
So, are we done with
everybody,
touchy feely?
I think we are. And hey, listen, You guys enjoy your meal tomorrow. Enjoy your family. Listen, I realize there's only a lot of you only see them twice a year. You know, forget all that other crap that goes on in life. Just appreciate who they are and how they got there. And if you really want to make an impression,
I'm Tommy Gobbler, and I'm stuffed with Thanksgiving happiness.
so
Wait.
Brian, bring about Thanksgiving. Let's talk about what's going on, man. When you get to the holidays, these commodities can go crazy on price, and so we're going to talk a little bit what's going on in the crude oil space. And you know what? I found out. I heard something, and I had to test it out and look at it. I did not know that SpaceX's heavy lift booster runs off jet fuel
Wow. Okay.
in their Star Lifter, the one that's going to go to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Cryogenic methane.
Wow. That's pretty cool. That's really cool.
You know why they want to run it with methane?
Because it's cheaper.
Because when you get to Mars, there's methane in the atmosphere. They can refuel in Mars.
Oh.
That is just so crazy.
Yes.
And they've got their own little plant down there that makes liquefied oxygen, because they mix the methane in the oxygen, and they get they get their methane that's cryogenic. Now, let's face it, they call it cryogenic methane. It's LNG, okay?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty cool. I think I did not I heard that just on the flash, and I'm going, wait a minute. We're going to space on jet fuel? That's pretty cool. And you know why they did that? It's cheaper.
I know a lot about sharks.
Yeah. I don't think there's any methane in sharks that I know of, but there's always bubbles around them. You never know.
There is. There is.
So
All right.
there you go. So a demand for jet fuel and a demand for methane, all at SpaceX.
Yep. Well, and that'll be interesting to see how that impacts things. But that is a small sliver of the global
Very
demand.
small sliver.
A very small sliver. And actually, speaking of oil demand, this is what we're going to talk about today, because today is Wednesday. So here in the US, we're preparing for Thanksgiving, which is tomorrow on Thursday, the 28th. But if you're following the oil markets, OPEC Plus is having their meeting on Sunday, the 1st. So that means this week we are trading crude oil, and there's rumors flying, and there's a lot of different directions. So what we're going to do is we're going to step back and try and understand the sea of information that's out there, and really try and dive into what is going to be critical and at the center of what OPEC Plus is going to be considering for their decision for 2025, their policy. So a lot of people have quoted figures, 5 million, 6 million barrels a day of curtailed production from OPEC. I have those numbers a little bit lower. I think, what did we calculate, Bill? 2.5 to 3?
2.5 to 3, and most of that's Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is close to 2.
Not Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, not Qatar.
Yep. Which the UAE is wanting more capacity for next year because they have some development projects. So we're going to dive into where we are now with OPEC, where we're going in the future, and what the global balance really looks like. And for those that don't know about us, we are Energy Rogue, and we put out a lot of information for Rogue Edge at $89 a month, which gives you access to Rogue Radar, which is right here. We put everything in a convenient red light, green light that tells you what global supply, global demand, commercial stocks, production, demand, so on and so forth for crude oil and natural gas, as well as gives you access to 150 charts, supply, demand, storage, technicals, All this for only $89 a month, and it opens you up to our interactive platform where you can check out things like supply and interact with the data so that you can ask yourself questions about why production went up from this period to this period. And these are some of the questions. This is the tool set that we utilize in our system. And we're down to 13.2 million barrels a day. But we would love to see in Rogue Edge. Rogue Premium
Right.
opens you up to our Discord channel as well as interactive. If you have a question, we're talking about things in the marketplace every single day. As a matter of fact, a lot of activity today where we're covering bulls, bears. All of this is just today's activity where the entire globe is coming around. So this is where if you're trading or hedging, Rogue Premium becomes an advantage for you. So Rogue Edge and Rogue Premium are where it's at. But what we really wanted to dive into today was, what is the crude oil market current landscape? What are the considerations that OPEC Plus is going to be looking at for their 2025 policy decision? Again, if you look for a quoted number on curtailed production from OPEC, I think you come up with 5 or 6 million barrels a day of curtailed production. When we actually evaluate it and peel back the onion, we actually come up with a number closer to 2.5 to 3. So we need to evaluate what that number is. And if we had all 3 million barrels put back on the market, what would that do to oil prices? What do
Right.
you think what do you think that would do, Bill?
Oh, it's going to make it really soft. And the other thing is that remember this: the ability to produce and the ability to deliver are two different things. So just because you can produce it, if you can't get it on the seas, if you can't get it to the market, it doesn't really exist.
Right. Right.
It sounds pretty existential, but it doesn't. And so,
Existential. Well, and wrapped in here is going to be a topic that we keep getting asked about, which is Trump's drill baby drill policy and what that might mean. Last week's live stream, we actually went back in time to 2016 to 2020 and really understood that the policy decisions for the drill baby drill did not result in added production in any way, shape, or form. It did relax some of the imports and some of the pipelines, but it did nothing on the production side. That was coincidental timing. If you want to go back to that, just look at the live stream from last week. So,
well, some of the things you have to look at that is when you start talking about that, the what you're going to see with Trump is not so much implementation to drill, but reducing the roadblocks that are in the way. That's what I expect to see out of that.
right. And again, we're not going to reiterate it, but look back in our channel, look back to our live stream from last week. It was at this time last week, and it should be pretty easy to find. But we disaggregate and take a look at policy versus economics, and really it was a coincidental timing of economics and productivity in the Permian. So let's take a look at where we are today. U.S. crude inventories are 4.5% below the 5-year seasonal average.
Let's say that should be
Gasoline,
bullish, right?
it should be.
Right.
However, when you look at U.S. inventories and you look at global inventories, you come up with a different conclusion. U.S.
Exactly.
inventories are, U.S. inventories are on the low side. Globally, especially on the distillate side, we do have a lot in stocks and a lot in storage. So now in the U.S., we don't. Now, part of that has to do with interest rates, believe it or not. So now Russian crude exports, those have increased by 100,000 to 2.93 million barrels a day. That's not their production, that is your exports. And now, what is the key difference here when you're talking about production and exports, Bill?
So, what they're doing is they're dumping storage. So they've been putting their production into storage because they've got some sanctions on them. Now they're still selling it into what I learned in the last few months is what they call the black fleet. In other words, these are the people who are buying that crude oil on a ship that no one really basically tracks. And
Right.
it ends up in places like China and India and in places where it's sort of hard for us. That's why some of these numbers never add up, because there's oil floating around there and going to places that we don't know about, or we find out about it later. Now, through satellite imagery, sort of like what we do in China, we can see based on the activity if production's up or down. Based on what the demand is up or down.
Let's bring a visual into play here. So this island right here,
That's the
all
main
of
export
these,
terminal,
yeah,
of Iran,
all
right?
of the, yeah, all of these arrows are tankers. What you can notice is there's nothing around the island here. However, they are exporting 1.9 million barrels of crude every single day out of that island, mostly out of that island. So what that means is what is actually reported is a little bit different than what we actually see. And there's
Right.
there's a long reason for that, and part of the reason is it has to do with some of the sanctions that are in place, which we are going to talk about a little bit later. So,
But that's what your difference is basically, what's coming out of storage versus what's coming out of production.
yep. Okay.
And by the way, in essence, folks, everything goes in a ship comes out of storage.
Right.
It's just how fast is they filling it with a pipeline. That's what it boils down to. Because there's no pipeline that goes directly into a ship.
Yeah. OPEC plus production. Dynamics and decisions, they're at a crossroads. So what is the current situation? OPEC Plus previously agreed to restore 2.2 million barrels a day of the output in monthly increments through late 2025. December 1st, the virtual meeting will address whether they delay or continue the 180,000 barrel a day increase for January, which again was originally targeted for December or November?
I think it was November.
I think it was November. I think they've kicked the can consecutive months, which personally is a little bit surprising to me because 180,000 is not it's not going to move the markets on it. I don't think.
Well,
Optically,
what,
it may.
You know what happens when you kick the can down the road? You eventually end up with a pile of cans and no road.
Well, we're going to talk about that. Discussions will point to a likely delay into Q2 of 2025, reflecting weak demand from China, which is down 5.4% year on year to 14.07 barrels a day in October. Now, there is something unique about October in Chinese imports. There is a strong rebound in November, so there's a little bit of stocks that you have to consider. You can't look at just one single month.
Right.
There is a recovery that is actually happening in November. However, I think it's catch up from October. But when you look at China holistically from a economic perspective, the key question at the center is China emerging to a mature economy? In other words, are the days of double-digit growth over in China? There's a lot of different opinions there, and I do think we may only, quote unquote, see a 4 to 5% increase from here on out. So,
and I tell you what, I'm going to take the under on that, mainly because of the demographics that's starting to happen in China.
well, and if if you're under from that, then OPEC's long range projections are going to be off.
Right. Now, but here's the other side of that. I think that at least 1% of that's going to be picked up by India. That's my projection.
Right.
I think underestimating what's going to happen in India.
I think India and Africa is where you look at growth next on the crude oil's demand side.
I think Africa is probably still 4 or 5 years out, in my personal opinion.
Okay.
But I think it's coming. So I don't. This is why when we look at the long term vision of what oil demand is going to be, I'm still bullish.
Yep. I'm very bullish because I don't think it's factored in. I think people have overestimated how much the energy transition is going to reduce crude oil consumption. That's fact one. Fact two is
Right.
I think they've underestimated emerging economies. So
Yes.
now that said, the entire globe, from an economic perspective, has been putting all of their emphasis on China for so long that as that changes, it is going to change economic landscapes as well as crude oil landscapes. So this is going to
Right.
be a massive, massive shift.
A
And
little bit of a reshuffling of the deck. I
Mhm.
don't think the demand's going to go away. It's just going to go to different places.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of interesting thoughts coming out from geopolitical analysts such as Peter Zion that reference, and I just listened to the end of China. It was like a TED Talk style, but I think it was an Asian conference. I gotta finish listening to that because
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. Yeah.
I don't recall who that was. Do you recall who that was?
No, I don't remember. I just remember that they had a lot of Asian people watching, and he'd say stuff, and he put up a graphic that was like, "Whoa, where did that come from?"
Yeah, there's a lot of data and projections that show that China may be not
I
only
think when this,
changing to a mature economy, but actually reversing its growth pattern and shrinking.
well, I think what it is, the amount of energy they use per capita is going to increase, but their capita is decreasing. So you're working sort of both ways.
I love the way you put these. Say that again. Say that again.
I said that the amount of energy they're using per capita is increasing. In other words, each person is using more and more energy, but their capita is decreasing. In other words, they don't have as many people.
I
And
love
so
that.
you have to sort of, yes, you see how it is? I'm pretty near an intellectual. Is that what you call them things?
That
Speaking of
is
which, I think I'll give you my thought process on OPEC is I think they're going to show an increase. I just don't think it's be 108,000 barrels.
in January.
Anyway, yeah.
You think on Sunday they're going to announce that they're going to bring back more than 180,000?
No,
I
less
will
than
I will
180, but they're going to bring back more. In other words, they got to show a growth, but it's not going to be as big as 180,000.
and I'm still not following. So in January, what are they going to increase?
So right now you're saying they're scheduled for 180,000, right?
That was
Increase.
as of the last meeting and the
Right.
last
So I'm
communication.
going to say they're going to say there's an increase. It's just not going to be up to 180,000. It's going to be like 100,000. In other words, it's not going to be the full increase.
I think they got to go all or none on this. I
I,
mean,
I
we'll
think I
find
think
out on Sunday. Here's what I project. Well,
they've
we'll
got to
stick
show
to
as confusing as a decision as possible.
so at the end of this live stream, I'm gonna forecast what I expect for January and what I expect for 2025 out of OPEC and what they are going to announce. And bear in mind, we're not financial advisors. This is not trading advice. This is two perspectives
Are you
from
calling your
people
friends in
in,
the Middle East again, Brian? I'm telling you
huh?
what, you always
No,
got
no.
that thing again. You're calling those guys over there saying, "Hey, what's happening, man?"
No. I mean, yeah, I'm going to project mine, but Bill, you're going to project yours.
Okay.
So we do have rising Russian and global inventories. Okay, as much as we just talked about with the U.S. being on the low side, which you can actually see on this handy dandy platform right here that shows you the stocks for commercial crude, for SPR, crude and product total stocks. if you want to get it, you can see we're on 5-year lows on all of them. We are mechanically building back SPR. Commercial crude stocks is on the bottom. However, when you look at that, that shows a bullish bias for crude markets combined with this one globally. Russian and global inventories are massively increasing. So what are the factors influencing the decision here, Bill?
Well, okay. First of all, we still have 2 wars going on. And I really not sure what's going to happen with them. But I think under this new administration, we're going to see something happen to them.
Right.
And so peace always drives the price down. War always drives the price up on crude oil. And so now there are some wars, it just doesn't matter. In Somalia, they don't care. Nothing happens, not enough demand. In the Middle East, you're affecting supply. In the West, you're affecting demand. And so that's where you have to watch for the geopolitics. And so right now, what we've got is some stuff going on in the Middle East that could affect supply. And that's what everybody's worried about.
Yep.
And so that's the geopolitics. That's what's going to make the difference. And then when you talk about non-OPEC production, people always talk about running out of oil in the world. Oh, Lord, we've got so much oil, it's not even funny. A lot of it's in places where they can't get it out. I mean,
Yep.
if I still remember right, Venezuela is the largest reserves, is the country that has the largest reserves of oil in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. But their government's so messed up, they can't even get their industry to get it out. If they were producing like Saudi Arabia was, we wouldn't be talking about Saudi Arabia. We'd talk about Venezuela. But they just don't have the stability in their government to be able to do that. And that's what causes most of this to happen, is stability of governments. So what does that mean? We're back to geopolitics.
So
It's a vicious it's a vicious.
Venezuela would be able to export more than Saudi Arabia?
If they had a stable enough government and policy to operate like Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're both basically dictatorships, but Saudi Arabia is, what would you call that? More benevolent? I don't know what you'd call that. They're just better at it. And so when you go and look up the reserves, the countries that have the most reserves, it will shock us. I think the 2 largest are in South America.
Wow. All right. Wait, South America. So Venezuela, Guyana, or somewhere else?
No, it's not Guyana. It's I wanted
Brazil?
to say it was either Brazil or Argentina.
Yeah, Brazil. I mean, Brazil has been the surprise. So geopolitics, we do have 2 wars going on, non-OPEC production, and this is going to be central. This is a factor that OPEC Plus needs to consider. On the geopolitical side, reports of an imminent ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. That is reducing some of the Middle East supply risks. So this is happening in advance of the OPEC Plus meeting. Now, counter that with escalation in Ukraine, which is Ukraine was just given the green light from the Western, I don't want to say NATO nations, but Western nations to use some of the long-range missiles and actually use those into Russia. So,
well, basically, what that means is England, U.S., Canada, and Germany.
Right. Yeah. So
possibly France.
You have both of those that are happening. A lot of there was a lot of expectation that the Ukraine-Russian war or conflict war, I don't know what the right terminology is. We're energy analysts, or when it comes to labels.
When they're using tanks and missiles, that's a war.
Yep. So when you look at that, when the war started out, a lot of people expected that this would be a rapid war done within 12 months. It's not happening. It's turning into a grind, which is costing a lot of money, a lot of lives, and this is also impacting energy security in areas other than Russia, other than Ukraine. This is impacting Europe in interesting ways on the natural gas side. And when you come into the geopolitics of Israel and Hezbollah, this one has been pretty dramatic over the last 12 months. And now there is expectation of a ceasefire. So that is definitely in the sights. Non-OPEC production, this is the other variable that OPEC will need to consider. U.S. production remains near record highs, but fell slightly. I need to revise this down to, let's revise it as we're talking, 13.2, because right there.
I thought the 13.4 was the high in August.
Well, what it had to do with is on the supply side, if you see this, and I know exactly why, and our members know why, and if you're curious to know why, at only $89 a month, you would know why. So we ticked down from 13.5 to 13.2. That had to do with a natural gas pipeline project, or not project, but inspection for Permian Highway that actually shut in some production for a week.
Right.
So U.S. production is at 13.2 million barrels a day, which last October of 2023, how much did we produce, Bill?
Oh, in October 2023? Was that our peak? Or was that 11 million barrels?
Nope. Last year. A year and a month.
I don't remember.
Fortunately, we have this thing.
Look at there.
So let's go back to October of 2023, 13.2. How about that?
Gosh, it's almost like we're flat.
Yep. So so U.S. production has been flat this year, and this is something that we've projected and that our members have projected, and that a lot of people have taken interest because a lot of people expected a huge wave of increase from U.S. Now, we're not going to dive into that, but there's reasons why we came to that conclusion, and this has been on the mark, and it has to do with how we track rigs, how we track declines, and we fortunately have built this phenomenal way of detecting whether we are growing or shrinking. We have this. If you want to have access to this, this tells you on any single month whether we are growing or dropping. Brazilian, Guyanese, Venezuelan, these supplies have aggregated to a lot of barrel increase in production. However, most of those barrel increases happen in the first half of 2024.
Right.
So that the latter half, we've been relatively flat.
So do you understand you understand what's going on there? They're using their old infrastructure because they all of these used to have higher production. So they're using the old infrastructure. They have now maxed that out.
Except
so
for Guyana.
Well, Guyana is building new, but that what's their total production is relatively because
It's about 250, 300,000.
yeah, right, and it's offshore, which is higher dollar facilities to build.
Yep.
Well, higher dollar facility to build over here. Over there, it's probably cheaper because of the labor costs. But they get to a point that they plateau, and then they have to build new infrastructure. And so we do the same thing here in the U.S. That's exactly, if you follow the Permian story, it's find supply, build infrastructure, find supply, build infrastructure, find supply, build infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's all the plateaus you see in the Permian is where we're building infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, and whether it's gas or for Permian, it's got to be both gas and crude oil because you got to do something with the gas once you create crude oil. So that's where I see that on the non-OPEC production is their ability to build infrastructure. Now, what's hosed a lot of that? All that's usually done on borrowed money when the interest rate is high. your return goes down.
Right.
And so if there's anything that's preventing infrastructure being built right now, it's probably interest rates more than anything.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
lower price doesn't help.
and this is where the interlocking between crude oil and economics come in play, because GDP, economic growth, interest rates, all of this, as well as oil to the value of the dollar, these all come into play. But this is the big elephant in the room: China's demand. This is what OPEC Plus is talking about behind closed doors. This is what they're projecting. And I will say something: OPEC provides some of the best forecasting that I have seen when it comes into long range forecasts. Now, at some times in shorter time frames, there are different projections as opposed to reality that comes with any analytic outcome or outlook. But when you
So,
look at, oh, go ahead.
so what I'm looking at this is that we need to understand that the oil demand fell by 4%. That doesn't mean that their GDP fell by 4%. Those are two different numbers, and they
Right.
use a lot of the same, and those numbers are both in the 4% range. So don't get them confused, because the economy is still growing in China. It's not growing as fast as people expected. Demand in oil fell year on year 4%, but China is very good at buying oil and storing it when it's cheap and backing off when it's high. And so that's the part you have to watch with China, because they will refine oil that they buy on a cheap basis and send it back out as refined products. And so it's important to sort of watch that whole process, because if they think they can make more money selling refined products to other people instead of improving their own country, they will do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what many people are pointing to and evaluating as whether or not China's economy is actually dropping. Now, let's actually go back in time. 2020 was COVID. 2021 was the start of the recovery. 2022 was a massive recovery, and 23 was catching up on all the previous orders
Right.
that were still backlogged from 2020. So when you compare 2023 to 2024, it really has, 2024 is our first real economic benchmark that is more normal since COVID.
You know what's very interesting? I've read this article, and I haven't researched as deep as I want to, mainly because I just run out of time, like I sleep sometimes. And was that China is now building factories in Mexico because the labor's cheaper.
Wow.
Yeah, that'll set you back a minute.
That gets back to your per capita conversation.
Right.
So, but think about it again. One key takeaway when we look at global economic situations. 2020 was COVID, so that was just an oddball year. 21 was trying to get reacclimated with restarting the global economy. 22 was a massive expansion, and we saw this on the commodity side. We saw it on everything, because there was just too much demand, because it had a 2.5 year backlog of
Right.
things. And so 22, we ran into rapid inflation, rapid expansion, rapid commodity expansion, and a lot of this was catch up from the COVID year. And then 23 was catching up on all the backlog of 22 orders. So 2024, when you're looking year on year versus 23 versus 22, it should look lower. So what that
Right.
means is,
If I remember correctly, China shut down again in 2021 for like 6 days. And so they actually had two major shutdowns over COVID. It was in
right,
2020, and I think it was again because they came back out, then all of a sudden they had another outbreak, and so they took it back down. I think it was in 2021, like second half of 2021.
right. Right.
Maybe 2022. Maybe it's one thing.
Well,
But
and
anyway,
this all factors in.
it interrupted the manufacturing process. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's important when you look at one time slice versus another. We talked about it a little bit earlier, comparing October to November. If you
Right.
only look at the October versus November, you get one viewpoint that says, oh, everything's recovering like crazy. There's going to be massive growth. Well, you have to look at October was kind of sluggish and November is catching up from that. So, but fact remains, China's demand, China's economy, and the GDP and the oil consumption all reconciled to a slower growing economy. So
Slower than expected. Let's put it that way.
So the key question is, if you look at global rates in mature economies such as the US, in mature economies in Europe, and mature economies elsewhere, you have a 1% growth or a 1.5% or a 2%. Those are normal growth patterns. For the last 2 decades, we've been looking at China having anywhere from 8% to 20% year-on-year growth every single year. So now, as China is slowing the growth, do they go from an 8% growth to a 5% growth? And if they go to that, what does that mean for global demand? Well, it means a lot, because that has been the backbone of oil demand growth. And if it doesn't come from China, that 3% more, where does that demand go? Where does that supply go? This is key and central to OPEC's decision on Sunday, December 1st. So now let's look at Trump and tariffs and the potential threat. So some of the proposed tariffs, there's a proposed 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports and a 10% on Chinese imports. This impacts energy, it impacts products, and Canada and Mexico collectively supply over 4.2 million barrels a day to US refiners. These tariffs would be a potential shock to North American markets. Now you can't just look at Canada and Mexico. You've got to look at tariffs across from China, from different oil importing areas, and what that's going to do. And this is going to create a lot of challenges. So this would be inflationary in a very, very big kind of way. Now, tariffs on a whole will dampen global trade. And a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, this would be a massive, massive price shock. So the 25% on Canadian Mexican imports.
So let's talk about this for a second. That is not just a one-way tariff. I've sort of dove into these a little bit deeper
Okay.
this week.
All right.
And sort of what this means is that these are in response to tariffs that these countries have on our goods going into them.
Okay.
And so this is in reaction to a trade imbalance as
Okay.
opposed to just a pure tariff. Now,
so goods that
effect-
we're exporting to Mexico and Canada are
So,
already being taxed.
I think it's a 50% tariff on electric vehicles going to China because they produce so many, they protect theirs. So they want to export those to us. And so it's because I actually listened to this. This was when Apple had all their deals in China, we were putting a tariff on them coming in. Of course, Apple went to the president saying, "Hey, we can't compete with Samsung, who's out of South Korea, because of this tariff."
Mm-hmm.
And President Trump said, "I'll give you a waiver, but for that waiver, you got to build something in the U.S." And that's exactly what Apple did. They built a manufacturing facility in Texas.
Okay.
And so this is a behavior modification tool that sounds horrible because of what it can do, but overall it's supposed to help the economy. Do I believe all of this? Probably not. But we just can't look at it from one spot. But for the oil and gas business, what it means is uh, more domestic production to keep it up. I don't think we have the ability to come up with another 4.2 million barrels a day out of the U.S. volumes.
Not with the current price structure.
And to be honest with you, we'd have to export most of it,
Right.
you know? And so as far as what Mexico's importing to us, a lot of people forget that Mexico bought out a refinery. Pemex owns a refinery in Houston. And so they're bringing their exports to their Houston refinery and shipping the refined products back to Mexico. So there's a lot going on. This is why Brian and I always say it's never one thing. That's why we're always looking at everything we can find. And we're
Right.
always researching, always researching.
Yep.
And that's why it's important to understand how these imports and exports work. Sorry about that. Just a little
Oh, no.
chasing a rabbit.
Well, I mean, that's a very valid point. In other words, if this tariff may actually be a starting point of a discussion between Canada, Mexico, and China. So it may just be a starting point of a negotiation. So looking at these headline numbers, you can't just look at the headline and say, well, 25%, we're going to see a 25% increase on crude oil prices in the U.S. That's not necessarily how it's going to work. So, now here's the tightrope. Here's the factors that we're looking at and that we're considering.
Not just one.
Not just one thing. It gets back to your previous soundbite. It's not just one thing. Crude oil market is in a precarious balance. OPEC Plus is at the center because they have restricted their supply to balance global markets. Prices have stabilized. Oh, go ahead.
They also have the ability to ramp up faster than anybody.
Yes. Yes.
Other people can ramp up, but they can't ramp up as fast as OPEC Plus.
Well, when we look at Brazil, when we look at Guyana, when we look at Venezuela, all of those are probably 6 months to 36 months out,
right,
from true growth. Whereas these cuts probably could be materialized within 60 days. Probably a lot of it would be in 30 days. So the oil market is in a precarious balance because we do have kind of a balance between supply and demand with our current output of supply. If you look at OPEC Plus, if they add the 3 million barrels a day, our expectation, if you look at the quoted number, it's closer to 5 to 6 million barrels a day. Our number is closer to 3. If all 3 million barrels came, oil prices would plummet. So prices have stabilized near $70 a barrel, but the road ahead is uncertain. There is a potential ceasefire in the Middle East. That's erased some of the supply concerns. Growing inventories worldwide hint at a well-supplied market globally. Weak demand from China and potential Trump tariffs in 2025. OPEC Plus. Now, before I get to number 6, I do want to quote, or not quote, I do want to state one thing, that when you look at the economic balances of Saudi Arabia, they are running a very large deficit. So when you look at adding more barrels to the mix, that increases their revenue. But if it thwarts oil prices to go down, they may hurt more than help themselves with the incremental barrels. So that is a balancing act that Saudi Arabia in particular, and I'm talking about their budget because that's what I read this morning. Now, OPEC Plus, my opinion, I think they're likely to delay any production increase to Q2 of 2025, potentially Q3. I'd counter that with saying that they would release the 180,000 barrels a day in January, and that they would delay any further increases to Q2 or Q3. Saudi Arabia has been reluctant to risk oversupply, and it has to do with budget balancing. So OPEC Plus must contend with rising non-OPEC production. As we said, given that the big engine of the United States is really behind the curve because it needs higher economics. We would need $20 a barrel higher for the U.S. to really start growing a lot.
Yeah,
The December,
yeah,
go ahead.
the lift cost is what we're talking about here. That's the cost to get oil from the ground to the surface. Lift costs are going up without any reciprocal price increase.
Mhm.
And so our companies are not state owned. And there's a big difference when you look at the economics between a state owned oil company and a privately or a publicly held company. Publicly held company has to make a profit. State owned have to make cash.
Right.
So two different motivations.
Yeah. The December 1st meeting is going to be watched closely. So on Sunday, everybody is going to be watching that and watching the news coming out of this. But one thing I would say is if you look at the supplies around the globe, U.S. production is ticked down. OPEC, we've been relatively since 2022. We went from 35 million. This is OPEC barrels only, not OPEC plus. 35 million barrels a day to currently 33. Wait, 35.6 to 33, roughly 2 out of OPEC. The rest is coming from somewhere else. Now, this is production. This is production. That's important to understand. And where is the other chart that I was going to look at? Here we go. What you can see here in this chart is this shows back in 2018 where we were up here and where we are down here. From an OPEC perspective, that's not a lot. But when you add in Russia and when you add in other nations in the Declaration of Cooperation, DOC, you can see where most of this is coming from. It's coming from Saudi Arabia, right here.
Yeah.
That's where you can see the big difference between what they're what they're capable of producing, which I would probably go back to this peak at 11, and we've kind of stabilized around this 9. So roughly most of the heavy lifting is coming from Saudi Arabia, which does have to balance this with their budgets. So tools, I was just showing you this, my next line. Tools like Rogue Edge help you create actionable insights to navigate these turbulent markets. So if you want to have this at your fingertips, all you have to do is just log in and you'll have all these charts right here where you can zoom in, you can slice and dice the data and really evaluate these questions. So
what we're saying is it's not just one thing being Rogue Edge. We'd like for you to have Rogue Edge. And it's the biggest, closest thing to having one thing to where you're going to get your information. But what we're telling you is that we are working for you to provide all this information so that you don't have to spend this 25, 30 hours a week trying to accumulate all this information and be able to make these type of statements and understand how you can back them up when you make these type of statements.
You know, I've always wondered about you guys.
So anyway, it's part of the reason that we can, as Bill was saying, it's part of the reason that we can state something and state an opinion and back it up with facts, back it up with figures, not just have an opinion based, I think they're going to do this. I think they're going to do this. Now, hopefully this has given you a toolkit on what to look at for Sunday, which again, Thanksgiving weekend. So I expect some interesting things on the crude oil markets by Sunday. I do expect some activity on Friday from the trading side as far as rumors getting flying. I believe, this is my belief, OPEC Plus, they will follow through with the 180,000 barrel a day increase, combined with a deferral of any other production increases to Q2 or Q3. That's my projection. What is your projection, Bill?
You know what? I think that they will come back shorter than the 180 and still kick those other cans down the road.
Okay.
I think they'll come in at probably around 100. It won't be, I mean, it's not going to be quite half. It'll be about 60% of that go. And they will be identified by very specific countries because they will use that to discipline some of their countries who are not observing their quota lines. So that's how they use their discipline. And so now I know some of you analysts out there, I can hear you. And when you are talking, you're saying, this is what I hear when you start talking.
Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side.
So based on our feeble skills, I think that, Brian, that we're going to see, I agree with you about kicking the other goals down the road to the third and fourth quarter. But I think they're going to have an increase. And
Wait,
I hope
you think third and fourth, right?
Yeah.
I think Q2, Q3. I think Q3 is likely, but they may defer the decision from Q2 to Q3 in 2025. If I'm putting up my crystal ball.
So you're saying they're not going to announce it on December 1st. That's what you're saying. They'll announce it later, that you're going to push it down the road.
I think they'll announce that they're kicking the can to Q2 for most of the production resumption and come up with a methodical plan for 2025, but that ultimately when the rubber meets the road, that those barrels really won't be seen till the third quarter. So
when it's announced it's 180,000, they're going to wait to see. If you're correct, they're going to see how this impacts the price. If it drives the price drives Brent price sub 65, which would be a big move.
Right.
I think they'll push everything out further.
Yeah. So listen, I think that's all we had for today.
Oh yeah, we're out of time, man.
Do us a favor. Drop us a like. Let us know what you think OPEC Plus is going to do on Sunday. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments because we do this every week. And with the start of December, we're probably going to be digesting what OPEC Plus decided next week. Still haven't come up with a topic next week. If you have a topic in mind, let us know. But I think that's all we had. And if you have a question, drop it below. We will get back to you. So in the meantime, we'd love to see you on the inside of Rogue Edge. So
you bet.
I think that's all we have. Is that all we have?
One more. Well, maybe.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
So happy Turkey Day for all the Americans in the room. And if you're not American, you still should watch the movie Freebirds. It's an amazing animated movie. It is so much fun to watch. So that's
and you talk about me. You have some of the strangest movies you like.
Planes, Trains, Automobiles. I mean,
oh no, I'm still trying to get over that V. I'm telling you what, that's a little scary.
No, that's a good one.
He says we're going the wrong way.
Oh, he's drunk.
So listen, folks, thanks so much. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you. We will see you next week. So you want to walk us out, Bill?
We can certainly do that. So let's go with something a little bit more impressive.